everybody else. Good to see everybody today. Everybody's looking good out there. Even Mitch. That's right.
You better clean those glasses.
That's right. Wait just a minute here.
He's cleaning his glasses.
Oh, you're right. No.
You look at them that way, buy a woman sunglasses.
Oh, no. Well, good morning. It's good to see folks that are back today and see a little better crowd today. It's always great. See, excuse me. I've heard about frog in your throat. That's ridiculous. But yeah, you know, got Kenneth back over there. Good to see you, man. Sure is. And so here we are, and we've been looking at Luke chapter 15. Really, all you have to do when you're teaching a class like this is just remember Luke chapter 15. I mean, it is a great chapter in the Bible. Has three great parables in it. And every one of the parables address the same issue that's going on here. As we read through the Gospels, there's no doubt that there is a ongoing saga between Jesus Christ and the Jewish religious leaders, the Pharisees and the scribes. And they're watching the things that Jesus are doing. We spoke last week that they're looking, and whenever he confronts them, they can't overcome his message. They can't beat him logically, spiritually, or anything else. So they're looking to destroy his reputation. A lot of times, that's the way things work out. People are, when they can't take what you're saying, your message away, uh-oh. A true servant here. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Just trying to settle your exam.
Yes. He's saying, don't forget me, man, when that happens.
You didn't tip him, though.
No, that'll be later. You know. So, yes, there you go. Here the Pharisees are there, and they're looking at him, and you know, the people try to destroy people's reputations. You see it a lot on every spectrum in society. When people are having a debate amongst one another, it may be political, it may be religious, really. But when they begin to suppose lose the logical part of it, they started trying to attack the person. So back in Luke 7:34, you know, when they spoke of Christ, they said, this man's a friend of tax collectors and sinners. You know, the way he is. And Jesus is a friend of sinners. We mentioned that song last week, sinners, you know, Jesus will receive. Well, to the world, they get that confused sometimes. They begin to look at that message and thinks, Jesus accepts sins. You know, we're good, we're fine. But that's not what it's saying. When it says that Jesus is a friend of sinners, a true friend does what? What's a sign of a good, true friend, really?
Tell the truth.
The truth. Now, he was a friend to these people, but did he speak truth, or did he just say what they wanted to hear?
No, he told him the truth.
That's right. He told them the truth. And he drew people to him. Because, you know, it is possible to speak truth to people and do it in a good way, to draw attention and speak with authority. I think that's one thing about Christ's teachings that we get, is the fact that he spoke the words of God. That's where the power is. It's not so much who's speaking it, but so that he speaks what God says. And he was here and he proclaimed the Father's message. They were drawn to it. I think, don't you think if today, if people hear the true word of God, that those that are interested in pursuit of truth will be drawn to it? Absolutely. People want to hear something real, not something that's pretend. And that's still true today. It doesn't hold them. What holds them is truth, and this is what Jesus showed. But still, they tried to mock him and say that he's a friend of sinners. And then starting at the first part of chapter 15, remember, says, and the Pharisees first it said in verse 1, then all the tax collectors and sinners drew near to him to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes complained, this man receives sinners and eats with them. So he spoke this parable to them. So then he began to speak parables. And we talked a little bit, just a quick review about the parable of the lost coin, it's sometimes called. That the woman had these precious coins and she lost one. And she swept the house diligently to find that coin. And when she found it, she called the people together, rejoicing that she found that one lost coin that had now been found. And we know that this represents anyone that's apart from the Lord. And now, when someone is lost and they're away and they come back, well, there's great rejoicing. We see a vision of heaven there. It says in verse 10, likewise, Jesus says, I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Sometimes, I guess, in such a big world, we get people lost in the crowd. A lot of times, when there's a large amount of people, in the human way of thinking, it's easy for somebody to kind of get lost or looked over. But that's not what the scriptures teach when they talk about the way God views us. He doesn't look over one single soul, and everyone is very precious to him, so that he says there's joy over one sinner who repents. So that's a real good lesson in the individuals, and that we should look at people and the value of their soul, and everybody is sought after. It says in the parable of the lost sheep, and we talked about sheep, how they wander away, and they need to be led, but when the sheep walked away, the good shepherd left and found that sheep and brought him back, brought the sheep back. Another example, and it says there was also rejoicing there when the sheep were brought back. And really, when you think about it now, who is going to lead sheep back? Who's going to lead anybody back that's astray today? As we stand in this world of 2025, whose job is it?
Ours.
It's ours. Who else will do it? Nobody. Nobody. That's been given to us. So when we think that Jesus came to seek and save the lost, and if we represent Christ in this world, it's our duty to look for the lost sheep, the lost coin. And now we'll look a little bit at the parable of the lost son. We've heard it called the prodigal son. We read most of it last week. We'll start to go through it a little bit today and go over some things. But what would you think that the word prodigal means? That's something we don't hear a lot, except when we talk about this.
Rebellious.
Rebellious. What else? Anything else? Kind of worldly, rebellious. That living that we talked about, this prodigal living that was mentioned. You know, what do we think? What do you think about when you hear this story and it said that he was engaged in prodigal living? What would you think? Some of the things that popped in your mind.
Wine, women, and song.
You said that last week. Wine, women, and song.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, that's
Are you trying to tell us something, Richard?
No, I'm just saying you hit it on the head.
well. You know, when you get down to it, that's right. And you know, you think about these things and wasteful living. So you think about today. Nothing's really changed since the beginning of time. I mean, the same things that are sought then are sought now. You know, I had that great opportunity to go downtown and work many days at night when they pull us to different assignments and say, hey, we need a certain amount of people downtown. And I tell you, you looked around, you saw it. I mean, exactly the things that are being taught. Well, back in this guy's days, there was no cars probably, and huge, huge buildings and structures the way they look. But it's the same thing, kind of things there. Worldly things. Things that people look at and they think this is great. And some of it, you know, people, they enjoy themselves a lot of times. Sin sometimes has pleasure in it because that's why it entices people. And that's another reason why a lot of people won't come to God. They're too interested in these pursuits. You know, people that are of the Spirit set their minds on things of the Spirit, and if you're in the flesh, the things of the flesh. This is what's talked about in Romans chapter 8. But let's look at some of these things. The parable of the lost son or the prodigal son. It says in verse 11 of Luke 15, then he said, a certain man had two sons. And that's really the key here. we're talking about two sons, not just one. And the second son is a pretty big part of the parable as well. It says, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. Well, when you think about that, these symbols in a parable represent something. So what does the Father represent? God. That's right. The Father in this is God. And the sons, how would you, any ideas on how you would just probably say what the sons represent? I've got my idea here. Well, I think when you look at it, they represent all of humanity. The sons represent humanity, the way that their attitudes and that we see. Everybody can fall in the category of the two sons here. And it says the younger son represents a departure, a rebellion, a departure from God. And the older son seems to represent the attitude of the Pharisees and the scribes that Jesus has just began to teach parables in response to what the Pharisees and scribes were saying. And the wasted resources that we'll see. Wasted resources are all the things of life that are outside the fellowship of God. Really, anything that is apart from God and His way of life is a waste. You think about somebody's life that has no relationship with God at all.
Destruction.
It is. Janice says it's destruction. Yes, ma'am.
Solomon said it's all in vain.
Richard made a good point. Solomon said it was all in vain. Ultimately, when you come down to it, no matter what a person accomplishes, when it's over, it's over. Yes, they have certain accomplishments in life, but unless they're looking and their soul lives forever, everything they've done is a waste. One day, this world will be burned up. We're taught to, and we know that. Everything we see, everything you can see, is temporary. That was something somebody said one time. It really makes an impact. Everything your eye can see is temporary. So we live in a very temporary world. We look towards what's not temporary. Of course, the Bible speaks of that. But it said that certain man had two sons, and now the old law did teach that, the elder son was to get how much of that portion of the inheritance. Well, we'll get to that a little bit because that comes on a little bit later. We'll just get to that in a minute. But when we look at it, it says that in verse 13, and many days after the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and wasted his possessions with prodigal living. What do you think that far country represents? Yeah, I said that a little bit. It's the world, though, and it's interesting to know it's a far country. When you get away from God, it can be said that you're way off in a far country, outside that presence of God. And we know when we talk about presence, a lot of times it can mean different things. God is where? Everywhere. He's everywhere. Well, Jesus ascended to heaven, and he says he's going back to the Father. But did he not say that he would be present with his disciples? And lo, I'm with you always. The presence of God. Presence is spoken about in different ways. And here it is, the presence of God. Though he's everywhere this person is, his eyes are everywhere, everything that he does. The presence of God, though he leaves in a figurative kind of way, he's gone. He's in a far country. Sometimes people think when they go away that they can't be seen. It's not true. Eyes of God are everywhere. And he said but when he had spent all, there arose a famine in that land, and he began to be in want. That land, that far country, that looked so good, all of a sudden, it was eaten up with a famine. Sometimes that far country that people seek is not so good. It'll eventually turn on them. And so but now what does he do? He spent all that he had. Everything that he was given is gone. He's in a far country. Now he's received the repercussions of his choices. And it says that in verse 15, then he went and joined himself to the citizen of that country and sent him into the fields to feed swine. A Jewish boy here, going to feed swine. Looking for something. Now he's humbled himself so much. Now he had something so good, and now he's feeding swine. And he would gladly be filled with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. He had to work in with the swine, and now he's happy if he eats what they're eating. Now you think about how we think today, and spiritually how people might be thinking. That once they may have been in a good relationship with God, and they find that the things that they chased after have turned on them. And now they're symbolically just sitting there in a far country eating with the swine. Isn't it amazing? And people get away and out of the relationship with God. We see it. These things that Jesus taught are the same things that happen today to us.
Do you ever see on Channel 5 at night, they'll show a portion of downtown,
Mm-hmm.
where all the bars and all that is?
Yes, ma'am.
And it's such crowded, planes, cars,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. What's the job?
Janice brought up the amount of people downtown and at all these wild places and everything. Well, that's a good, once again, that's the biblical description of the wide gate and the narrow gate. You know, it's easier for all those cars to get through the wide gate, you know. That's right. So that's biblical. That's what we should expect to see.
You used to working there, didn't you?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, it's amazing. And then in verse 17, it says he came to himself. That's one of the most intriguing verses in the Bible to me. He came to himself. We know what that means. Have you ever come to yourself and think, wow, wait a minute, just time out. This is not right. This is wrong. And I've got to get things corrected here, because if I don't, it's just, this is not ending right. People come to themselves. And he said, how many of my father's hired? Now he's thinking, you know, why did he come to this? So what's he thinking during this process? He's thinking back now at his blessings. He said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare? And I perish with hunger. I'm starving to death. And my father's servants, not even related to him, are eating good. I will arise and go to my father and will say to him. Now that's a plan of action right there. He came to himself the moment he began to start thinking clearly again. Thinking clearly. And he acknowledged that he needed to do something. He said, and he made a plan of action. That's the first thing that has to be done. Somebody has to come to themselves, and then they have to determine there's things to do. And he says, I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. Now that's humility. He's not even asking, Father, restore me the way I was before. He's saying, just make me a servant, like one of your servants. But the first thing he did, he said that he acknowledged his sin against his father and against heaven. What's one word for that? It starts with an R. Repent. That's right. He's repenting of what he has done. And it says he sinned against heaven, because any sin is ultimately against who? It's against God. But we can sin against our fellow man because the actions that we do cause harm to our fellow brothers, sisters, and persons of this world. So he realizes he's wrong, the God of heaven and his Father on earth here. But the Father said to his servants, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Now, this person that had received blessings at one time describes him as being lost. But why was he lost? Did God leave him? Or did he leave God? That's always the situation.
It's his choice.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's his choice. And he was lost and he's found. And now, but the Father receives him back in a great way. There's that rejoicing again. Yeah, I suppose if I was a father, I would have probably said something like, I told you that would happen.
See? See?
Don't we? Yeah, I told you, boy. I mean, you know, you didn't listen. You know, I'm about to take you back. You can hear it, you know. But, you know, but God, like we said last week, we often look at our attitude towards God, but sometimes we don't look at God's attitude towards us. And when we look at it, the creator of heaven and earth, the all-powerful God, is a gracious, merciful God. And that ought to bring great comfort to anybody. Of the power that's in God's hand to do what he wants to do, he has mercy for those that will turn back to him. The whole Bible is trying to get people to turn back to him. I can't believe it. The bells already ringing. Now it says 25 here. Now the older son was in the field, and he came and drew near to the house. He heard music and dancing. Can you imagine? He's out there and he starts to hear all these things. So he's going up to see what's going on. So he called one of his servants and asked, what do these things mean? He said to him, your brother has come. And because he received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. You can just see this guy's face change. It's sometimes called his countenance falls, you know. He probably was smiling and then, you know. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. Now, we see the Pharisees so angry because Jesus is receiving these sinners. He's condemned them, the Pharisees, for their self-righteousness, but he's receiving these lowly people. They don't like him. You see how the second son represents these Pharisees and scribes and self-righteous religious leaders? He knows how to get to them. So he answered and said to his father, lo, these many days I have been serving you. I have never transgressed your commandment at any time, which is not true, by the way, because, as in the example, that this is a comparison to the Pharisees, they most certainly have rejected him. And if you want to mark this down, look at Matthew chapter 23 and read it and see if this is really a true statement. But to him, he hasn't transgressed at all. And he says, and you never gave me a young goat, and that I might make merry with my friends. Well, I recall back when he divided the inheritance, he got his portion, which when you look in Deuteronomy, and him being the oldest son, he receives 2 parts. Right? He did receive something. He's not telling the whole truth here. He's looking past his blessings already. But as soon as your son comes, but as soon as this son of yours came, you have devoured your livelihood he had devoured his livelihood with harlots. You killed the fatted calf for him. You see the comparisons being made here in those that Jesus was sitting with at the time and the way the Pharisees were angry. And he said to him, son, you were always with me, and all that I have is yours. And the Jews had been led by God all the way back when he delivered them from Egyptian bondage and through the wilderness. And be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. Well, they were drawing a comparison here. They were looking to their own self-righteousness, saying that they had never sinned, that they had not received all the blessings they had, but in fact they had. But the Father was trying to encourage them to say, look, your brother, the one that was lost, is now found, and in this they were not rejoicing. It makes you think about our attitudes towards certain people in society and the way that we should look and rejoice when a sinner really turns back to God. But like you said, as we said at the beginning of the lesson, that's not overlooking sin. This is one that has came to himself, turned back to God. And as we talked about encouragement this morning in the sermon, these are, of all people we should encourage. Those that are trying to turn and lead their life towards God. So what are some of the lessons today as we wait for this bell? It says, and remember our part in all this, because we speak for God now on earth through His Word. We teach people. But God seeks and receives sinners. That's one lesson that's learned. God seeks them, and He receives them when they repent. Also, a man is responsible, or a woman is responsible for being lost. Now, we see this because this younger son chose to leave. For whatever reason, he chose it.
Being broke and hungry.
That's right, absolutely. And
As a matter of fact, but like you say, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
He turned back.
that's
I
right,
think that's the whole point of that part of Luke, was he had a choice.
that's right.
You know, he could have stayed and eventually probably pulled himself out by
Mhm.
himself, maybe,
Mhm.
but he chose to come back to God, knowing that that was the way he needed to go.
That's right, yes, sir. Brother Lance, yeah, that's a good comment, because what happened was suffering. And suffering will turn a lot of people back to God because they realize and they'll come to themselves. But real quick, separation from God can bring suffering, and it does. A lot of times. We even read about that in Revelation. Life apart from God is a wasted life. To come to God, we must admit we are sinful. And a wrong attitude towards others can cause one to lose their own soul. So that's something to think about. But anyway, we'll start with another parable next week. Thank you all very much for your attention.